Today I spent some time working on a few couple poses for The Sims 4, and in one of them, I used a tulip bouquet accessory. The bouquet was attached to the left hand, not by me, but by the creator of the accessory, and more specifically, it was rigged to the stigmata bone. That kind of rigging is something I really appreciate when I'm working with accessories and poses. The stigmata bone gives a lot more freedom for posing because it moves independently and doesn't restrict the way the accessory behaves in Blender or in-game. So when I rotate or reposition the Sim's hand holding the bouquet, the tulips move naturally with it. That's a big win, because whatever I create in Blender ends up looking the same in the game. I tend to use accessories like that, ones attached only to one hand, pretty often. In this case, the tulips were in the left hand, and I left the right hand free to interact with the partner or create more expressive gestures. It's a setup I like because it simplifies the pose-making process. You don't need to look for an accessory that's rigged for both hands, which is rare anyway, and you still get a nice visual element to work with. On the other hand, I usually try to avoid accessories that are rigged to the ring bone. That bone is very limited in how it moves, and when an object is attached to it, it often just stays stuck in one place. You can't rotate it freely, and that restricts your creative freedom when posing. No matter how you try to position the hand or adjust the angle, the accessory doesn't follow the way you'd expect. A good example of this problem is a baseball bat accessory I came across. It wasn't rigged to the stigmata bone. It didn't behave quite the way I needed. I had a few pose ideas involving the bat, maybe something dramatic, like holding it over the shoulder or gripping it defensively. But because I couldn't get it to align naturally, I had to scrap those ideas for in-game poses. Of course, I could still go ahead and release those poses just for Blender users. Blender gives you more control, and you can pose things however you want without relying on the rigged bone placements. But since I focus mostly on making poses for the game itself, it felt a bit limiting. I want poses to work for everyone, not just the people using Blender. That said, I am personally more into Blender. I love it for the visual freedom it gives. The lighting, camera angles, and rendering options are just way beyond what you can get in-game. In Blender, I can create cleaner, more emotional shots. I can fine-tune things like finger positioning or facial expressions with way more detail. Plus, I don't have to worry about in-game lighting ruining the mood of the pose or causing weird shadows. Even though I like working in Blender more, I still really enjoy making poses for in-game use. It's a fun challenge to work within the game's limitations and still find ways to create something that looks good and tells a story. And most people who download my poses are using them in-game, not in Blender. So I try to make sure everything works as smoothly as possible in that environment. For those who aren't familiar with the technical side of it, when an accessory creator rigs an object to a specific bone, like stigmata, ring, or even spine bones, it determines how that object will behave when you pose the sim. Stigmata is often preferred for things like bouquets, weapons, or handheld props because it's easier to move, but it depends on the accessory creator. They decide which bone to use when they make the item. Sometimes, the bone an accessory is attached to also affects where it shows up in CAS. For example, accessories rigged to stigmata might not appear under rings or bracelets. They might show up in the hats category or even in gloves, depending on how the creator categorized the item. That can confuse people if they don't know where to look pose packs that use custom accessories. And here's another little tip. Even when the accessory is rigged well, always test it in-game before you release the pose. Blender can trick you into thinking something looks perfect, but once it's in the game, lighting, body shapes, and minor clipping can ruin the effect. So I usually go back and forth a few times, checking the pose in-game, tweaking it in Blender, and re-importing it until everything feels right. Back to the bat example. I might revisit it in the future. I still think those pose ideas could work, maybe with a different accessory or a re-rigged version of the bat. Or, like I said, I could release a version just for Blender users. It's always disappointing when you have a strong vision for a pose, but the technical side gets in the way. Still, I'd rather hold off than release something that doesn't work well for most players. At the end of the day, making poses is this weird mix of creativity and technical problem solving. You have an image in your head, but you're constantly working around bone limits, accessory placements, and game behavior. Sometimes you get lucky and everything just works. Other times, it's a lot of back and forth, trial and error, and learning from mistakes. But that's part of the fun, honestly. It's really satisfying when everything finally clicks, and even more so when someone uses your pose in their own story or screenshot, and it helps bring their idea to life. That's what keeps me creating, even on the days when Blender crashes or the in-game test doesn't look quite right. While working on this couple pose, I ran into an issue with the male sim's arm rotation. At first, it looked like the upper arm was clipping weirdly into the body. It didn't look natural at all, like it was bent too far inward or twisted too much at the shoulder. I thought maybe I had over-rotated it or messed up the pose, and it really threw off the whole vibe I was going for. I spent some time trying to fix it, rotating the arm in different ways to figure out what looked right. But honestly, working like that in an older version of Blender was frustrating. The viewport wasn't helping. It made everything harder to judge. So I ended up switching to a newer Blender version, where changing the viewport didn't mess things up, and I could actually work more smoothly without the pose looking broken. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Check my poses, link in the description, and see you in the next video. Bye!